These are 3 short journeys over weekends and perhaps Easter. This particular first one was an Easter meet of the Canoe Camping Club. And in those days, this is just after the last war, they were all folding canoes. Every Easter they do some trip or other. We were all friends together. Here we are starting on the river just above Ross, and here we are passing on down. I think that's the Ross Rowing Club. May have a different name, but that's what it is. These titles will give you some idea of where we were on the river. Goodrich Castle in the top there. We had a wonderful time here in this castle because we came up into it at night and haunted it and looked terrified at times, which was quite amusing. This is Kerme Bridge, just downstream of Goodrich Castle. River was not unusual. It was about its normal running height, I think. All sorts of ages of youngsters on the river and oldsters as well. This is a nephew of mine who must have been 11 or 12, I should think. He brought a friend with him, Joe. Simmons' yacht, which is always supposed to put the fear of God into you and is in fact now so used by canoeists, it's overcrowded. There's a chap in an Eskimo kayak, or rather a folding one, going down Simmons' yacht. This, you can see it's early in the year, but no leaves on the trees. They're all still without leaf. At this campsite at Dixton, we suffered a howling gale and a lot of the tents got blown down in the night. But we passed on all right. One gets over these things. And arriving at Monmouth. No stop unless you wanted to shop. Don't forget it was Easter and the shops would probably be shut. There's always a sense of adventure about these things, a terrific sense of adventure. River moves quite fast. It is one of the faster rivers in the country. So you don't have to do much work. It's only asses who canoe up rivers. The man who wrote the song just wasn't a canoeist. Can I canoe you up the river? No fear. Down river, yes. You just don't work unless it's necessary to steer the thing. And so to Tintern. We played at Ghosts a bit in Tintern Abbey as well, but the tide was low. Obviously we had to run down to Tintern on the outgoing tide, so you arrive low, and the mud was quite incredible. Glorious old abbey. And we didn't actually play Ghosts properly, but we waited until the place was closed down and then went into the abbey and looked around it inside. As you see, the weather wasn't good. It was pouring with rain. But on the whole, the trip wasn't too bad. More tide, more mud. You can see the mud banks there and the great white chalk cliffs of Chepstow. And so, Chepstow Castle, more mud. The fire brigade had washed the steps down. It was part of their duty. If you said you were going to arrive there, there were steps right down to the low level so that we could get out, not so muddy, pack up our canoes and catch our wonderful steam train home. This trip was quite a short trip with 3 lads, starting just below Farnham and getting to Godalming. I didn't take an awful lot of the picture. Still the folding canoes. We had 2 doubles, I think. We must have done. And of course I was in one of them, so when I had to take pictures, I had to stand on the bank. When you do these trips down these little streams, you do come across nature as it really is. We get anglers being cross with us for interfering, but in actual fact the number of anglers who we find have just caught a fish just after we've gone by is quite extraordinary. Mixing up with fallen trees is a bit of a battle, but one can get through somehow. And now to an absolutely wonderful trip round Beachy Head. The other people in the party were members of the Canoe Camping Club. I got them to join me on this trip because I had a friend, Cecil, who made the film, and he really knew how to photograph, many of the photographs being taken from the top of Beachy Head. You want to arrive at Beachy Head about high water, so that you have no back eddy from Eastbourne up to Beachy Head. The Seven Sisters Cliffs, marvellous. Seaford Head at the end there. Same old canoes, folding canoes. That's my barge again, the 4-seater with just 2 youngsters in it. Fairly novice, both of them, but they still enjoyed it. The trip has to be made with some care, particularly as to the weather forecast, because you can come badly unstuck around Beachy Head. But if you go with the tide, then it's not a very difficult trip. And one thing worth noticing here is the difference in the colours of the water, where chalk has affected it and produced chalky coloured waters, and further out to sea it's just beautifully clear and clean. Here we are at Beachy Head Lighthouse. We weren't allowed to go in because it was a Sunday, just a day trip round the headland. Again, another short trip, down early in the morning, back home again in the evening. Round the Beachy Head, and you can see in the far distance there the clear water and the chalky water near too. And a lot of passengers paying their small sums of money to be sick in the fast motorboats. No fun for anybody there. Prefer canoeing, please. Another seasick boat. Eastbourne Pier, and ourselves arriving. Now we've got 2 short expeditions here. One with the Wests, which was just a day. Lower down from Gunners Lake down to their farmstead, which was on top of the cliffs hills at Calstock. We started just above what we call the graveyard, just above Gunners Lake. All the granite boulders, you'll see more of them on the second trip. On down through Placidish waters. Here is the Tamar, starts, as you see, why it's called the frontier of Cornwall and England, flowing right down from the north coast, very near the north coast, and going out to sea at Plymouth Sound. And we did from Launceston to Calstock. Here my friend Major Bill Armitage and I are getting our canoe ready at Launceston. Here is Bill pulling the frame out of the bag and starting to build up the canoe. Don't think he'd ever seen one himself, but he had some ideas of how it all worked. Yes, what on earth to do with it? And having built it up together, We then walked it down on its little wheels in front, which was the usual way, and start off. It was a huge thing, and because it was easier to see that way, I preferred to sit on the deck at the after end of it. And you can see 3 of the cockpits. I got the boat a little bit before the war as a family 2-seater. It's a Tyne family 2-seater. On down the river, which is a placid one with easy riffles from time to time, and some weirs and croys and things built across the river for the sake of the fishing folk. It's a very good salmon river, actually, or certainly was then. Grade 1, perhaps. They were all very easy, although I was very much inexperienced. By the way, it's so long ago I'm using flat paddles. Well, why not? They're easy to manoeuvre. Yes, this is spring, isn't it? There are no leaves on the trees. These things look a bit frightening when you're not used to them, but in fact they weren't very severe. 1, no more. Grade 1, no more. Some of the riffles needed careful manipulation. Nowadays, you biff and bang things down. It's not very waterman-like, but okay. 3 people come down to see us. We saw very few people, because this is during the war, and most people were busy working, especially during the daytime, while we went on just taking this break down the river. Nice, easy break from the other business that we had when we were up in London. To be careful with some of these riffles, because this was a folding canoe with a soft rubber skin, and if you hit anything, you drilled a hole in the boat and then you sank. You can see me still sitting quite safely on the back, steering the canoe. It was easier there. Here's one of the little croys, with normally would be during the fishing season. The anglers would be on the end, and on we come down through the riffles at the bottom. Here's the beginning of the graveyard, which you saw in that first bit. You can see these great round boulders clearly here, and the care of steering through them, which at this low level of water was not at all difficult, just tedious. Gunners Lake Weir and the Salmon Ladder. This was a biggish weir at Gunners Lake. It's a salmon weir, and we had portage that. And here we are down at the farm at Culstock, and I can see Kit West coming down to greet us. And so too, picking the flowers, a never-ending task at that time of year, to send up to London for those that wanted daffodils. And so away to catch a train home. This is a trip just after the war, wasn't it? So we had to do it all by train and carefully organised to know exactly what we were doing. Through a series of lochs from Dalwhinnie, I think, right down through Loch Rannoch and down the Tamar Valley until we arrive eventually at Pitlochry. We had all sorts of adventures and games there, where we tried a bit of rock climbing, and here am I unpacking my own canoe from the garage roof. It was a folding canoe, as we all had in those days, so that we could pack all the gear together, and here's the 4 of us together. They were pals of mine, so we said, shall we make this trip up? And they said, yes, rather. Here's me doing a bit of gardening, which was one of my greater hobbies. Me as the canoeist, this lad as the photographer, and this lad as one of the hopeful canoeists sitting on the back of my huge 2-seater. Not at all good management, but that canoe was an enormous one, and we can pack everything into it, as you see. The other one was a sports 2-seater, considerably smaller, and you had to sit a bit more tidily. And at this particular moment, it wasn't raining, but it did rain quite a bit on this particular trip, I remember. And here we are to start off on Loch Ericht, not very far away from Dalwhinnie. You can see my enormous two-seater going on there. Nasty weather pretty well the whole time. Our first campsite down at the bottom end of the loch, Ben Alder, where there is a crofter's house, little cottage, unoccupied, and we went in and did some of our cooking inside, and then decided that Ben Alder had to be climbed, so we set off scrambling up it. It was a scramble rather than anything else, right to the top, resting on the way up. Wonderful view. Here's our little croft and our campsite as photographed as we went up. Lovely views over the hills and the mountains. Loch Ericht is somewhat an artificial loch. Oh, there's a young fawn which we nearly trod on running away, and there's father watching us wondering what on earth's to happen. Don't think it was a crime to dig up plants in those days. It certainly is nowadays. Here we are at the top of Ben Alder. Me digging more plants out. Kids found some snow to throw snowballs about the place. Dashed cold. And me sliding on a scout pole stuck out behind me. More digging out of plants, trying to take them home. Don't think any of them grew on this occasion. And us packing the canoes again, and off we go again from that lovely little campsite. Weather was not good, as you saw. Loch Ericht has this big dam across, and there was absolutely no water flowing over it down the river, so we had to do a 6-mile portage, which is quite long. Just as well we brought the wheels with us and could lug the canoes along on their wheels down to the next canoeable piece. I think Loch Rannoch, isn't it? Yes. Starting away, getting down to the loch side, and the first thing we came across was a small island called Ilen Furlag, which means the island of seagulls. Here's one of the little herring gulls trying to get away from us, and another one pretending it's part of the scenery. Here we are sorting ourselves out a bit out in the water. I don't remember exactly why. We had 2 of these doubles. One of them wasn't as big as the other. Time to get the lunch out, and the easy way to do that is to stop, unpack the lunch from the canoe rather than try and eat it afloat. Next campsite, the foot of Loch Rannoch, I think. Yes, here's the dam across the loch in order to produce the hydroelectric scheme. The Scottish hydroelectric people have dammed all these lochs, and then we come into the river Tamar. This is a fast-flowing river until you arrive at the next loch, where there's another dam, and so on all the way down very nearly until you get to the River Tay. Dunalaster Loch here. This is a tiny one. And here the river flows in, or is taken into an aqueduct with some of the water flowing down, but we didn't think there was enough, and we didn't want to go into the machinery of the hydroelectric scheme, so we decided another portage. Not very long, back into the river below the hydroelectric scheme, and then we could go on down. It's a gorgeous, wonderful part of the world, absolutely beautiful. Loch Tummel, another big loch, before another quite small weir. and after one or two rapids we decide the thing is possibly getting too difficult, too far away from a road, so we decide we've got to stop again, we'll have another camp and then go on down. The falls of Canoe don't look very hospitable. And so to our next camp. And one way of getting the stuff down from the campsite was just to bowl it down the slope until it arrived where the boats were. We must have hit something here and I'm mending a puncture. And so another, possibly the worst of the portages. It's a heck of a long portage over the top, quite a long climb, and here's what the river looked like, and certainly didn't look canoeable to us. The Falls of Tamar, another impossible piece to us. So get in below the Falls of Tamar, and where we picked the boy up, I can't think. Doesn't matter. He had a nice ride in the front of my huge canoe, and here we are having to let a canoe down over the rocks on a rope in order to save us hitting the rocks with our heavy weights in the canoe. And now we're in the River Tamar, and we're unpacking at Pitlochry in order to prepare for the train journey home. Pitlochry, High Street, do a bit of shopping, and in the train home. May have noticed that I was in uniform. This is because it was right at the end of the war, and I was still not demobilized.